Hello, friends of Sacred Sound. My name is Deva Munai. I am a guardian of Crystal Tones Alchemy Singing Bowls, as well as the founder of Sacred Sound and Wonder in Big Sur, California. And I am excited to share with you a healing, relaxing sound journey. And I will be sharing this amazing set of alchemies. There is a platinum bowl bringing forth the energy of the divine feminine, a green goddess helping us to connect to the nature spirits, as well as a Saint Germain tapping us into the violet flame and magic. And then there is a jade and platinum bowl bringing forth good luck, prosperity, as well as a divine feng shui helping us to bring harmony into our homes, balancing the elementals of earth, water, fire, air, and ether. There is also a Moldavite bowl over here. The Star Bridge. Moldavite came from a meteorite that fell in the Bohemia plateau of the Czech Republic 15 million years ago, and it formed this amazing fusion that is now known as Moldavite. So it literally connects us up to the stars, which we are all stardust, but really brings us into that cosmic field. And then there's a shungite and palladium bowl, which brings forth childlike play and wonder through the palladium, and then protection with the shungite. I also will be activating this new set that just came in. There's an abalone platinum bowl bringing forth oceanic wisdom. There is a black tourmaline with platinum that really helps to protect our field, protect our homes, as well as this amazing divine mother bowl. This is a really special alchemy. She already wants to start singing for you. She's composed of diamond, helping to align and balance all of our chakras, ruby, silver, white gold, platinum, and kyanite. So a very protective and just activating, empowering bowl of the Divine Mother. And in this set, we also have an ocean gold, bringing forth more oceanic wisdom. And I just love this. The ocean's right outside the window here behind the studio. So we're really sending you all a lot of ocean energy from the Pacific and a lot of healing from the mother. This is a mother of platinum bowl as well. It has that very just beautiful, calm, yin, healing energy. So I would like to invite you to find a place where you can receive. Allow yourself to be deeply nourished by the frequencies. And if you have any questions about the bowls or would like to stay in touch, my website is sacredsound.love, and I would love to hear how this healing sound journey is for you. So please feel free to reach out, send me a note, and enjoy the conference. All right, let's take a moment. Go ahead and allow yourself to soften your eyes. Tuning in to your breath. Sense of protection surrounding your entire physical and energetic body. Calling upon your angels and your allies, your guardians and your guides, animal spirit totems, to infuse body, mind, and spirit through these healing frequencies. May this sound journey be in divine alignment with your highest good and for the greatest good of all beings. So may it be, and so it is. Shoo, shoo, shoo.
Welcome to another presentation of the Globe Sound Healing Conference. Today we have Jon Stewart Reed. Hi, Jon.
Hi, lovely to be with you. I'm excited to share today, actually.
Welcome, welcome. Jon Stewart Reed is an English acoustics pioneer, scientist, and inventor on a mission to educate and inspire the world in the field of cymatics, the study of visible sound, and to promote the field of sound therapy, supporting one's body to heal naturally. His CymaScope invention has changed our perception of sound forever. Seeing sound allows us to more fully and deeply understand this omnipresent aspect of our world and universe. His cymatics research is helping to elevate this important new field in the scientific arena, including a study focused on how dolphins use echolocation to see with sound, published in the Journal of Marine Biology, a study on differentiating the sounds emitted by healthy cells and cancer cells, published in the Water Journal, and a study on the effects of music on human blood, with initial reports published on experiment.com. He's currently writing a chapter of sound therapy and music medicine for a new medical textbook. Sounds like you're not bored. Excellent. Okay, so what are you up to? What have you been up to recently here?
Well, you mentioned that I've been writing a chapter. Actually, the chapter is now complete. Mm-hmm. And indeed, the presentation that I'm going to be giving today is essentially a distillation of at least some of the biological mechanisms mentioned in that chapter. It's actually very exciting because, this is the first time that this type of information has been or will be made available to the medical mainstream. And so that's why I'm very excited about it. And I'll talk a little bit about that right at the beginning of my presentation.
Excellent. It's really interesting because, my mission as well has been, as you know, is to really help change the medical field, mostly so we're just not killing people, so often, or hurting people with medicine, because it's really dangerous to go into a hospital, you could say, keep the things that are happening and really just introduce things that have less side effects. And so I see that as a really big mission. What do you see as the main thing? If we had all the money in the world, what would be the main thing that we could realistically do to really help people?
Well, that's a great question, David. There are so many energetic modalities out there that, in other words, drug-free therapies, and yet currently they're not being used. In fact, even in the field of, even in the integrative medicine organizations, they're not currently using, almost none of them are using sound as a healing modality or music as a healing modality, despite the fact that music therapy has been around for 50, 60 years, and it's still not really part of integrative medicine. So to answer your question, if we had all the money in the world, well, we could bring powers to bear. I mean, like this, for example, this European Union initiative that I'm involved with right now, that's fairly major money. They're actually injecting some pretty big funds into this. So the book is going to be distributed, to medical professionals all over the world, and not only in English language, but also it's going to be translated into Russian and Slovakian, but then I'm sure other language editions will follow. So again, coming back to your question, I think education is the key, and I'm not talking about here necessarily education of the general public, although that would be certainly important too, but education of the clinicians, the medical doctors who in the medical schools are not taught any of these new modalities or these alternative modalities. So if we had lots of funds, I would be injecting it into education, mainly the medical profession, but also the general public, because many people just don't know that these kind of modalities are available. So imagine, you know, advertising campaigns coming up on television that are telling people that what is available, you know, instructing them. That would be the way that I would go.
Nice. We're just completed a proposal for 5 shows on Netflix.
Wow.
And it's all about the science, and you'll be in it. You'll be just to let you know, right? You think there's a good amount of research that still needs to be done to convince the medical field?
No, I don't actually. I mean, you know, when you receive a copy of my chapter, David, I think you will agree that virtually, you know, we're already there, really. We already have most of the knowledge that we need. And certainly in order to make a really good start with drug-free therapies, we are already there. I'm not saying that we have all the answers, of course. There are so much more that we could learn in the future. But certainly you know, when you read the chapter, I think you'll agree that we've already got sufficient to start actually providing these therapies to the mainstream.
Excellent, just excellent. Cool, I can't wait to see it. So tell us what your presentation's about today.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, it's essentially a distillation of the information in that chapter. Not all of it, of course. It's a lot of information in that chapter. But, you know, many of the biological mechanisms are described in the chapter, and I will be describing quite a few of them today. But before we reach that point, I think it's very important for viewers to understand some of the physics of sound, so that when we reach that point, it all starts to make a lot more sense than it would do, you know, if we didn't talk about the physics before that.
Excellent. Okay, great. Well, go ahead and begin.
Great. Well, I'll begin by sharing my screen. Okay, so you can see that, David, right? So let me begin, first of all, as I mentioned.
I'm sorry, yes.
Okay, as I mentioned just before there to David, that we are actually in the process now of producing this new medical textbook, which is being prepared in Europe, but it will actually be distributed all over the world to medical professionals everywhere, not only in English, but also in Russian and Slovakian. And then I'm sure that other language editions will follow. It's an exciting initiative by the European Union. And the main purpose of it is to try to build bridges, or to begin to build bridges, let's say, between integrative medicine and mainstream medicine, and simply to educate medical doctors everywhere that these alternative modalities are available. And of course, I'm including in that sound therapy and music medicine. So a lot of people ask me, what is the difference between a Chladni plate, a simple Chladni plate that you play with a violin bow, and the cymoscope instrument? Well, the main difference is, as I'm just about to describe, is that the Chladni plate is not really a calibrated scientific instrument. It's more of a scientific curiosity, let's say. When you play the plate with, say, in this case, a violin bow, you get beautiful patterns. And the patterns are certainly replicable. You can put the violin bow on the same side, the same point on the plate, and get pretty much the same pattern each time. However, what you're seeing there in those patterns is not the sound made visible. Essentially, what you're seeing is the modal frequencies, or the modal resonances of that particular aspect of the plate made visible, right? So it's not saying very much about the initiating sound, the initiating frequency. It's saying far more, excuse me, about the resonant properties of the plate. Now, that's not to say that the cymoscope instrument itself does not have resonant property, because of course it does. You know, everything in the universe has resonant properties. The main difference is, of course, that we are able to tune them out electronically. So when we put a sound into the cymoscope instrument, the model, the cymatic model of the sound that we see is an accurate scientific model, replicable every time, and is not affected by the resonant properties of the seismoscope. Of course, the other aspect is that the Chladni plate is, of course, using particulate matter, usually sand or salt or something, whereas the seismoscope instrument is using pure water. And what we're really doing here is we are transforming sonic periodicities to water wavelet periodicities, therefore creating an accurate model of the sound. Now, I'd like to talk briefly about the holographic properties of sound. You'll notice in this beautiful sevenfold seismoglyph, which is the voice of Jonathan Goldman made visible, that the camera is seeing multiple 3D layers. Of course, this is a 2D photograph, but you can see there that it's actually showing a lot of 3D information. Now, why is that? Well, the reason is because when sound enters into water, it organizes the trillions and trillions of water molecules, not only on the surface of the water, but significantly into the depths of the water, depending upon the amplitude of the sound that you're injecting into the water. And those sound pressure fronts actually change the refractive index just slightly, enough for the light to reflect off different depths, different layers in the water. And that's why you can see all these different structures. So now, just for a moment, I'd like you to imagine sound coming into your body from music or any form of musical instrument, and imagine how that is structuring all of the visceral waters in your body. And also, as I'll discuss a little bit later, how the cymatic patterns literally manifest on the surface membranes of every cell in your body. Because one of the cymatic principles, the basic cymatic principle, is that whenever you have sound and you have a membrane, you have to have a cymatic pattern. Of course, you can't see it normally, but nevertheless, it is there. And here in this slide, you're seeing now a view through the side wall of a square section cuvette. Again, this is fused quartz. It's half filled with water, as you see. And what we're doing here is we're injecting a 10 hertz sinusoidal tone into the water. And you see there, I've put a dotted line showing the water's surface. All of what you're seeing beneath that dotted line is actually structure that's being created by the 10 hertz injected into the water. So notice there's no excursion at this point above the water's surface. And yet, if you see the next slide, you'll see that the actual view from above is gorgeous. It's absolutely beautiful. So all of this structure is occurring at this particular amplitude beneath the water's surface. Not yet. If we added more amplitude, then yes, of course, we would start to see excursions above the water.
How big is that water droplet?
Well, we're talking, in the case of the square cuvette, it's about 22 millimeters square, something like just under 1 inch square. That's the kind of size that we're talking about.
Okay, and then the actual water droplets are less than that before the previous
well, we're coming to this particular slide here now, David, is, you know, a very, very important slide. And these are literally microscopic water droplets. So here we're looking at a microscopy video, essentially. And I would like to describe it before I begin to play it, so you get some idea what you're looking at and its importance. It's extremely important. So every one of these little tiny, what they call sessile drops, an individual little water droplets, every single one of them will receive the same amount of acoustic energy. Why? Because this tiny area of the slide under the microscope is sitting on a piezoelectric transducer. So literally every water droplet receives exactly the same amount of energy. But what you're going to see is that two largest droplets are going to exhibit a very beautiful cymatic pattern. The medium-sized droplets are going to start to receive the energy and look as though they're going to be doing something, but they don't actually do anything. And then the smallest droplets, you will notice, do absolutely nothing. It's as though they're not receiving any acoustic energy at all. And the reason for this, of course, concerns resonance. And this is why resonance is such an important aspect of sound therapy and indeed music medicine. So let's just play the video now and you'll see exactly what I mean. Oh, sorry, go back. We'll just stop it there because of time, but
Okay.
you know, I'm sure that you saw that the little droplets are doing absolutely nothing, even though they're receiving exactly the same amount of energy as the medium size and the large droplets.
So essentially those are droplets within a water droplet.
No, it's a microscope slide that's, it's essentially a dry slide. It's Teflon, actually. This is why they are reacting in the way they do in terms of sessile. You know, they're able to cling to that surface beautifully. It's a dry slide, so they're just little tiny, well, you wouldn't hardly be able to see them with the naked eye. Even the large ones would be difficult to see.
So they're actual tiny water droplets at different sizes.
They are.
I got it.
But
Cool.
now I'd like you to imagine those same kind of patterns that you saw on the two largest droplets imprinted onto the cellular membranes. Every cell in your body, with the exception of your brain cells, of course, have membranes. So now I'm hoping that, you know, after seeing that sessile drop video and showing you here a cross section through the membrane of a cell with the little integral membrane proteins that are projecting out, you know, and they are the means by which the cell communicates with its brother and sister cells. Also the way that the cell takes in nutrients and excretes waste products. So now you can imagine these beautiful cymatic patterns. Whenever you're immersed in music or any harmonic sound field, every cell in your body will be receiving beautiful cymatic patterns. And because sound continually changes its phase, these patterns will not be static. They will actually rotate about the cell. And so the little IMPs are going to get a beautiful little massage by any cymatic pattern. And I'd like you to know that cymatics as a general principle is regardless of scale. It doesn't matter about the scale. So here you see the planet Saturn, and there's a giant hexagon on the North Pole created by a cymatic principle. So, and it's so large it could swallow 3 Earths. And then at the other end of the scale, you've just seen cymatic patterns in the microscopic realm. So cymatics seem shows a hypothetical mechanism by which that pattern occurred on the planet Saturn.
Sorry, can I ask one question before you continue? Sure. Because my understanding is that only certain frequency nodes create the cymatic patterns. So are the cells getting other, like, not so clear patterns in between the nodes? Because there's only certain frequencies that really create the beautiful patterns, right?
No, as long as the frequencies are harmonically related, then you will always get beauty. And okay. It doesn't matter, you know, and these patterns will occur regardless. I mean, you can do a frequency sweep, for example, with the cymoscope instrument, and at every single frequency there is beauty, 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 beauty. It doesn't matter what the frequency is, as long as it's beautiful sound to the ear, it will be beautiful when it occurs on the water membrane and indeed in the depths of the water. Now, the other aspect of cymatics I'd just like you to dwell on for a moment is that it is a triadic phenomena, by which I mean that the frequency of excitation generates a dynamic standing wave, which in turn creates the apparent stationary form, the cymoglyph as we call them. But in reality, cymoglyphs only present the illusion of permanence, and their genesis can be studied during different phases of oscillation when viewed by means of a camera if different shutter speeds are selected. So what I'm driving at here is that whenever you see a cymoglyph or any kind of cymatic pattern, the persistence of vision, of your own vision, is showing you one aspect of that pattern. But if you had different sort of shutter speeds, if you like, of your vision, you would see something a little different every time. So, and of course, we do use different shutter speeds to capture different moments of expression within cymoglyphs. It was Sir Humphrey Davy who said, "Nothing tends so much as to the advancement of knowledge as the application of a new instrument." And of course, that's exactly what we have with the cymoscope. What would we know about the realm of stars without a telescope? Well, actually, very little. You know, ancient people saw little points of light. We would be no better off if we didn't have a telescope. What would we know about the realm of cells without a microscope? Well, actually, even worse off than that with the telescope, because the microscopic realm wasn't even suspected to exist. And indeed, you know, when Robert Hooke first started looking down a microscope and making beautiful drawings, because of course there were no cameras in those days, the scientific community didn't even believe him until they went with and saw with their own eyes, looking down the microscope. Then they believed, of course. What would we know about the realm of the visible sound without a cymoscope? Well, again, the answer is actually pretty much nothing. So the cymoscope has opened up entirely new realms of investigation for many scientists, and cymoscope instruments are now in use by many universities all over the world. So coming back to this principle of holography in relation to sound, here you see a violin being played, and emerging from it is a bubble, a sonic bubble. So why do we talk about sound waves when in fact they're really bubbles? Well, it's an old term, of course, and one reason that we talk about sound waves is because the energy is actually sinusoidal. In other words, when you graph it, it looks like a wave. So if you see a sound signal, for example, on an oscilloscope device, it will look like a wave, right? But nature does not use graphs. So in nature, all audible sounds are spherical in their space form. And so basically that sphere that we're seeing there emerging from the violin is obviously expanding at the speed of sound, but as it's expanding, it's oscillating in and out. And it's that oscillation, that pulsation, which when we graph it, looks sinusoidal. And that's why we talk about sound waves, even though in reality, they are sound bubbles. And the cymoscope instrument, it shows us a cross section through the sound bubble. Now, here's a slightly larger version of that same image. If we were to zoom in now to any atom or any molecule on the surface of that bubble, we would find that it's oscillating in all the different ways, all the different vibrations that are being created by the particular note that young woman is playing on the violin. In other words, we don't need a whole bunch of atoms or molecules to express the vibrations of that particular note. One atom or one molecule carries all of the vibrations. And it's the same true if you go inside that bubble and look at any atom or any molecule in the interior of the bubble, you'll find exactly the same situation. And this is why we term sound as holographic or quasi-holographic. I'd now like to introduce you to the concept of sound gives birth to infrared light. And this is extremely important when it comes to sound therapy and music medicine, to understand the basic principles of why there is healing, why sound can trigger the healing response, for example. So here we see two atoms that are going to collide with a velocity v. And then at the bottom there, you see that they have indeed collided. So what's this F1 and F2? Well, F1 is the local frequency of vibration of that atom. What do I mean by that? Well, in any room, for example, where I am sitting right now, there's a particular temperature, as there is where you're sitting in your own room. And that temperature is what dictates the frequency of vibration of all the atoms and all the molecules that are in that room. So what's F2? Well, F2 is just a notional frequency that we're going to give these atoms. And let's call it 100 hertz. So we make a 100 hertz tone, for example, either with our voice or with some musical instrument, doesn't matter. So now the atom that's had this very fast vibration, which is the local temperature, is now also moving with a 100 hertz movement, a frequency, a periodicity at the same time, doing two things at the same time, in other words. And of course, you see the principle that if you have a complex sound, such as from that violin, where there are multiple frequencies, that one atom is doing all those things simultaneously. But look at the bottom now, look at the bottom of the graphic where the atoms have collided. What you need to understand here is that atoms and all molecules have what is known as a magnetic moment. What that means is they're literally surrounded by magnetism. And you know, when you put two magnets together, like two north poles or two south poles, they don't really want to go together. They have that sort of spongy feeling. Well, this must be something like what atoms experience when they collide from each other. These are called inelastic collisions. And the term in science and physics simply means that some energy, some radiant energy must be given off when these atoms or these molecules collide, must be. And you see there the energy that's given off. Now, the energy that's given off is actually both frequencies. You've got the radiant frequency, which is related to the temperature of the atom in space, but it's also being modulated by the sound, by this 100 hertz. And you see there where there's a little legend that says sonic frequency F2 after demodulation. What this means is that simply by using, say, for example, a photodiode and then demodulating that radiant energy, we can retrieve the original sound from the electromagnetism, from that radiant energy. This is an extremely important aspect of physics. And I think we all know that if we rub our hands together very vigorously, we will create warmth. Well, what's happening is the molecules in one hand are slipping past the molecules in the other. And of course, I'm talking here about the magnetic fields around these molecules is really what's happening. And whenever you do that, these are all trillions and trillions of inelastic sonic collisions, which generate radiant energy. And that radiant energy is, of course, infrared. And the infrared that's given off when you do that, you hear the sound of your hands rubbing together. Well, that sound is actually then modulating the amplitude of the infrared that's given off. So it's again, a very important principle to understand. And here is an actual little formula that tells you sound power in watts can be calculated from the sound intensity multiplied by the particle velocity and multiplied by the surface area. And at the bottom there, since all inelastic collisions create light of lower or higher frequency, depending on the velocity of the collisions, this may explain why a gentle caress of the skin feels like electricity, because in theory, such low particle velocities actually create low-level microwave energy. And it's also why all sounds create either infrared light or, in some cases, visible light, i.e. biophotons. And here you see a young woman, a bit like Julie Andrews on top of a hill, singing to the stars. When we sing to the stars, the atomic inelastic collisions created by our singing creates infrared light that is modulated by our voice frequencies. And that IR light zips through the atmosphere into space, where in theory it will travel forever, unless it meets some dense matter. And this same principle is being used by the James Webb telescope. It's an IR optimized telescope, and it's about to be launched actually December of 2021, if all goes to plan. And the wonderful thing about this telescope is, of course, that it is optimized in IR. And here we're talking about infrared light that's going out into space. But also a few years ago, we did a wonderful project with the Smithsonian Institute where they sent us some sound files from stars. Asteroid Seismology is the study of the sonic signatures of stars. So they listen in to the sounds inside the star simply by monitoring its light and then demodulating it, as I just explained. So you can retrieve the original sounds from inside the star, and then we can make it visible seismoscopically. But imagine now the James Webb telescope and its potentiality, because let's say there's a planet, remote planet somewhere that has an ocean, and it's got waves crashing on the ocean shore, making infrared light that's modulated by that sound. So one day it might actually be possible for us to listen in to the sounds on that ancient alien planet, rather. And in the Buddhist tradition, they believe that when striking their giant temple bell, the sound reverberates throughout the universe. This is an ancient tradition, and yet we now know that they are actually correct, though it's not the sound of the bell that propagates into space, but it's the amplitude modulations of the infrared light. So why am I sharing all of this information about infrared light and its relationship with sound? Sound gives birth to infrared light, or sound gives birth to light, period. Well, as intercellular communications occur mainly in the far infrared spectrum, the physics of sound-light interactions infer that sonic modulated light is conveyed to cells in the medium of their own language. This means that music and other therapeutic sonic frequencies convey harmonic energy information direct to cells in a language they understand. And that's why this is so important. And here you see on this slide, it's showing you the spectrum of IR light that's created in which cell-to-cell communications occur. There's also a little bit of visible light and a little bit of UV light, but almost all intercell communications occur in the infrared spectrum. And that's why this is so important. So all the sounds that are made by sound practitioners, for example, sound therapists, when they're injected into people, are actually speaking the language of the cells through the infrared component. And here's a wonderful paper that talks about these kind of cell-to-cell communications. It's a review paper, so it's obviously concerned with many different studies, and it would be, I definitely highly recommend it to you. We come on now to Dr. Gerald Pollack and his structured water science. Life as we know it cannot exist, of course, without liquid water, which he calls structured water or exclusion zone or EZ water. And it's discussed in depth by Gerald Pollack in his groundbreaking book, The Fourth Phase of Water. In it, he proposes that EZ water, which is H3O2, literally generates the electricity that helps power all living creatures. Here then is a connection waiting to be explored between sound frequencies that organize water molecules, as I explained earlier, and EZ water that powers life. Dr. Pollack has discovered that EZ water is built by light, particularly infrared light, yielding a potentially fascinating connection between sound and our physiology. And it is this: inelastic sonic collisions create sonically modulated infrared light that in turn powers the EZ water building mechanism in cells, which in turn powers our biology. Or put differently and simply, sound powers life. Go back one. So all harmonic sounds contain phi, the golden ratio, which is 1 to 1.618. And since this important ratio is prevalent in the DNA of all living creatures and in the proportions of their forms, it can be stated that there is a natural connection between sound and life. And here are some of the many formulas that show the relationship mathematically between harmonic sinusoidal sound and the phi ratio. Here's a cross-section through DNA revealing its tenfold structure. Since 5 and 10-fold structures contain phi, the golden ratio, we can correlate the structure of DNA with the sine curve, as shown in the various formula linking phi with sound. And here, I'm pretty sure you all know this well-known pentagonal image. Pentagonal geometry contains phi, the golden ratio, deeply embedded in the DNA molecule, but also in every sinusoidal sound. That's very important to know, because every sound contains this golden ratio. And when the pentagon is phase shifted by 45 degrees, tenfold geometry is created, exactly as occurs in the cross-sectional structure of the DNA molecule. This is a wonderful discovery that was made by Professor Petukov, Sergei Petukov. The importance of the 3:2 musical ratio in vocalizations has come to light as a result of discoveries made by a Russian team led by Sergei Petukov. Apart from the commonly known aspects of this ratio, it is less well known, that it also exists between frequencies of the second and third harmonics of an oscillating string and by our vocal folds and in any harmonic sound. They discovered that complementary pairs of nitrogenous bases exist that feature 3 and 2 hydrogen bonds respectively. DNA is therefore a chain of numbers 3 and 2 of the hydrogen bonds. And the implications of this discovery are that when we sing or immerse our body in harmonic sounds, we are actually singing a form of genetic music, music that brings healing to all life. I think that's a really wonderful discovery. I didn't know that myself, you know, when I first read this, and I was astonished that I didn't know it. But
and that's a musical fifth.
Yes, indeed, and yet, yes.
Right.
It's a really wonderful discovery. So it basically means that all of these beautiful harmonic sounds that we use, you know, every day in our lives, and indeed just normal music, contains this beautiful ratio that's actually speaking directly with our DNA. I love that. I love that idea. And I think some of you will probably be familiar with Georgi Dorsky's beautiful book, The Power of Limits, which elegantly reveals the phi ratio embedded in all human, animal, insect, and plant life. Now, moving on now to sonocytology. Sono, of course, meaning sound, and cytology meaning the cell science. I'll just have a little drink of water. I think it was around 2002 that Dr. Jimzewski made the discovery that every cell in our body has a unique sonic signature. In other words, it literally generates sound. And amazingly, all of the sounds emitted by cells in our body are actually in the audible spectrum. In other words, if our ears were sensitive enough to be able to hear those sounds, well, it would probably drive us nuts, actually. So it's probably just as well that we can't hear them, but they are nevertheless all in the audible spectrum. I'm not going to read all of this to you, but basically the simple principle is that he used was an atomic force microscope. And there you see a little cantilever with a laser beam reflected off it. That cantilever is microscopic, and literally the tip of it, a little bit like the old-fashioned record players, you know, the tip actually touches on to the surface, in this case, of a cell. And as the cell respirates, it's literally making sound all of the time. So that movement of the lever will vibrate, and the light reflecting from that will be collected by a photodiode and demodulated, as we talked about earlier, so that we can literally hear the sound of the cell. Now, I did a study with Professor Sung-Chul Ji of Rutgers University. And what this study was all about was listening in to the sounds of healthy cells and cancer cells, not in this case using an atomic force microscope, but actually using a more user-friendly method, using Raman Spectroscopy. So with Raman Spectroscopy, we're using a laser which strikes not one cell, but potentially hundreds, or in some cases even thousands of cells. So the signal that we're receiving from those cells is obviously much stronger, and we don't need quite such sensitive instrumentation to be able to listen in to the sounds of cells. And what we found in this study was that healthy cells almost always produce beautiful symmetrical cymoglyphs, the name that we coined for sound image. And then on the right there, you see a typical cancer cell image, and you see how it's kind of subjectively ugly, it's skewed, and it's very irregular. And that's typical. And this study concerned the idea that a surgeon, when he or she is operating on someone to remove, say, a tumor, apparently it's not that easy to know where the tumor ends and the healthy tissue begins. Sometimes the tissues look almost identical. So we are, this is a first step to create a tool, a new tool for surgeons that would allow them to be able to differentiate exactly where the tumor ends and the healthy cell tissues begin. But there's an even more exciting potential for this technology in the future, and that is the potential to be able to eradicate cancer entirely. And this would happen simply through what I mentioned earlier, the laws of resonance. So if we can listen in to the sound of a cancer cell, and we can using Raman spectroscopy, and then amplify it greatly and feed that amplified sound back in to those same cancer cells, you know what will happen? The cancer cells will readily, naturally absorb through the laws of resonance a lot of acoustic energy, so much so that they will disrupt and die, whereas nearby healthy cells will not be unduly affected. They might be a little bit stressed because clearly you would need high sound levels to do this, but certainly they should still continue to live even after this particular treatment. So it's a wonderful potential for the future. And there you see Dr. Sungchul Ji and myself in the Cymoscope lab. And here's the paper that came out of that research. Now we're coming on to the core material of this presentation. You probably were wondering, well, when is he ever going to be talking about how sound heals? Well, this is the moment. So we're going to talk first about the role of nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is a gas, of course, that's produced in the body. It's produced in many places, but primarily in the sinus cavities and also in our lungs. And nitric oxide reduces blood pressure by vasodilation and has many other health benefits derived from this important molecule. For example, promotion of wound healing by cellular proliferation and angiogenesis, mediation of cutaneous edema and inflammation, cytotoxic action against pathogens, increases cerebral blood flow and oxygenation to the brain, inhibits the aggregation of platelets within blood vessels, thus helping to prevent thrombotic events, supports reduction of pulmonary hypertension and chronic obstructive airway disease. And that's just a small sample of some of the many ways that nitric oxide actually supports us. And here in a paper titled Assessment of Nasal and Sinus Nitric Oxide Output Using Single Breath Humming, the authors show that nitric oxide is significantly increased by a single breath exhalation while humming, as shown in the graph, which is extraordinary when you think about it. Look at the difference between not humming and humming. Nitric oxide is produced, as I mentioned, in the paranasal sinus cavities, which have a Helmholtz resonant frequency of between 1 kilohertz and 2 kilohertz, depending on skull size. So obviously, a male tends to have a slightly larger head than most females. So in males, clearly, we'll be talking about a 1 kilohertz ballpark resonant frequency and 2 kilohertz ballpark for a female. Nasal breathing increases nitric oxide production and can be enhanced by active humming and singing, and passively by full body immersion in music. Nitric oxide is also produced in the lungs, which have Helmholtz resonant frequencies of between 100 and 150 hertz. Now, I think this is very exciting, the idea that we can passively create nitric oxide. So what I mean by that is we don't have to hum, we don't even have to sing. All we have to do is immerse ourselves in a harmonic soundscape. And that could be music, literally from a high fidelity system, or, and I'm talking now about whole body immersion, by the way, not headphones, okay? Or it could be any of the conventional musical instruments that we know about, or Tibetan bowls, crystal bowls, tuning forks, whatever we're talking about in terms of a soundscape will actually support nitric oxide production. The reason this happens is because if you have any complex sound, then, and you have a cavity, in this case, you know, in the sinus cavities or say in the lungs, it will automatically, that cavity will automatically choose the resonant frequency, the frequency at which it most naturally resonates. And that will just happen totally automatically when we immerse ourselves in any beautiful harmonic musical environment. And here actually is a formula showing you the Helmholtz resonant frequencies for those who are interested in that formula. Now we come on to a second method by which music boosts the immune system. This is a lot of writing. I'm not going to read it all to you, but essentially, you know, you can review this later yourself. The point about this is mainly that when we are happy, when we're in joy, and of course, beautiful music can put us into that joyful state very rapidly, then dopamine in our brain is automatically generated. We have to be happy to generate the dopamine. But as long as we are happy and, you know, feeling the joy of this beautiful music, then dopamine will be automatically created by our brain. Also, cortisol will be suppressed in our body. You know, cortisol is the fight or flight hormone, and that is suppressed whenever we are feeling happy and joyful. So the idea here is, of course, to put ourselves into a musical environment that we really love. So it's not just any music, it has to be music that we really, really love. And that kind of music, whatever it is, and we all have our own different musical tastes, of course, but whatever it is, will create dopamine. And the wonderful thing about this is that whenever dopamine is created in the body, it immediately starts production of leukocytes and other white blood cells. In other words, a direct connection between happiness, joyfulness, music, and a powerful immune system boost. We come on now to mediation of chronic pain by sound and music. And this is an extremely important aspect, of course, of sound therapy and music medicine. Chronic pain is a common, complex, and distressing problem, which has a significant impact on individuals and society. Chronic pain, like most diseases, often arises from a series or combination of multiple events. The biological processes that lead to the chronic pain state further increase sensitivity to painful stimuli and perceived levels of stress, which further modify the pain-related gene expression, creating a pathological pain cycle. Prolonged use of analgesics, such as chronic opioid therapy, is associated with constipation, sleep-disordered breathing, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal dysregulation, fractures as a result of osteoporosis, and significant declines in health-related quality of life and increased healthcare costs. Therefore, and this is the point, it would be advantageous to mitigate chronic pain without long-term use of analgesics. Just have a little drink. Now, this is a wonderful piece of research. I first read about this around 2012. According to research by the Niels Bohr Institute, nerves primarily conduct sound or soliton impulses, which in turn create electrical impulses via the piezoelectric effect. All categories of nerve fiber are sensitive to mechanical vibration, i.e. specific sound frequencies and music. Now, isn't this wonderful that nerves actually conduct sound? And, you know, a lot of people, and myself included, have wondered about this for many, many years. Why? Because electricity travels at, even in a wire, right, at near the speed of light. So why, I've always wondered, why were nerve impulses so slow? You know, it shows you there the fattest nerve fiber on the left, 100 meters a second is the fastest nerve fiber. And yet electricity travels, you know, umpteen orders of magnitude faster than that. So anyway, here is the answer. Nerves do not conduct electricity. They actually conduct sound, and the electrical impulses come as a byproduct of the sound because of the piezoelectric effect. So I'm not saying the electricity is not flowing in our nervous system. Of course it is, but it's being created always by sound. It's a little bit to get your head around, but I'm sure when you review this, you'll understand it. Now, again, a very busy slide, and I'm not going to read all of this to you, but the gate control theory of pain was first proposed in 1965 by Ronald Melzack and Patrick Wall. And when it was first proposed, the theory was met with considerable skepticism, but despite having to undergo several modifications, its basic concept remains unchanged. You see there's a diagram, and what this is showing you is that the A delta and type C fiber inputs, which are actually the smallest type of nerve fiber, they cause the gate to open. So any nervous impulses that are flowing along those type of fibers cause the gate to open and pain to be perceived, obviously, by the brain. But by applying mechanical pressure to the large diameter fibers, that is the A beta type, or by applying specific sound frequencies locally to the site of pain, the gate closes and the pain is mediated. And that's a wonderful discovery. And of course, it's the frequencies that are used tend to be in the lower frequency bands for this pain mediation mechanism. So not usually the higher frequencies. Most of them have been discovered to be in the lower frequency registers. And you know, we all know that what happens if we strike our finger or thumb with a hammer while we're trying to put a nail in somewhere, it causes extreme pain. And the automatic response to that is to hold the finger or hold the thumb very tightly. And when we do that, of course, it significantly reduces the pain. And now this is the reason, of course, because what you're doing there is you're applying mechanical pressure to those large fibers, which are then causing the gate to close. So most of the pain then goes away when you do that. And this is because it is mechanical pressure, which is exactly what sound is. Now, there's a second pain modulatory mechanism called the descending pain modulatory system. So this second system of pain mediation involves the periaqueductal gray matter in the midbrain and the rostral ventral media medulla, which are two important areas of the brain involved in descending inhibitory modulation. Both of these centers contain high concentrations of opioid receptors and endogenous opioids. And this actually helps to explain why opioids are analgesic in the first place. But the key information here is that descending pathways project from the midbrain to the dorsal horn of the spinal cord and inhibit pain transmission during periods of either psychological stimulation, such as strong emotions, but also which can be evoked by experiencing beautiful music. So again, here's another mechanism. You know, we talked earlier there about how beautiful music causes dopamine release, which then leads to leukocyte proliferation and there boosts the immune system, right? But here's another mechanism by which when we experience beautiful music, it actually inhibits pain. And here is the cross-section through a typical cross-section through a spinal cord. And there on the left, you see the dorsal root ganglion. That's where all these pain signals actually enter into the spinal cord and then, of course, travel up to the brain. Now, here's a fourth aspect of pain, We're talking now about breaking the pain, spasm, pain cycle in spinal injury by sound. It's well known that spinal injuries typically create muscle spasms to splint the site of the injury, providing protection while the healing process takes place. This is an automatic function of the body. The trauma caused by a spinal injury or other injury causes pain, of course, which leads to muscle tension. A cascade of effects then results in which the muscle tension decreases the blood circulation, which hypothetically causes hypoxia and further pain in the affected muscles. The spasm then intensifies, which causes the hypoxia to intensify, and of course the pain to intensify, therefore causing far more pain than the original injury. And I think most of you probably know by now that what really triggered my whole 20 plus years of research in terms of sound therapy and music medicine and so on was the almost miraculous healing that occurred for me in the Great Pyramid in 1997. I'd entered the pyramid in great pain because I'd severely injured my lower back 3 weeks earlier. But within 20 minutes of making sound in the King's Chamber, all of the pain left me. And it's taken many years for me to understand that mechanism. How is it that simply by creating, again, low frequency sound in the King's Chamber, banished that pain completely, never came back, right? And yet I'd been in agony going in, and I'd taken analgesics, I'd been to a physiotherapist, nothing touched that pain, but low frequency sound removed it immediately. And this is the hypothetical reason. Of course, we can never be absolutely certain, but you know, when you have a cramp, it's very, very painful. Well, one of the reasons for that is that when the muscles cramp, they literally squeeze out the blood, literally from the muscles. And when that happens, of course, the muscles go into a hypoxic situation. In other words, they've got no oxygen. And when they've got no oxygen, they tighten even further. And so we all know what that feels like, you know, when muscles cramp. Well, here is a mechanism in terms of splinting. The body automatically splints an injury, the site of an injury, to protect it while it's healing. And that splinting actually creates far more pain usually than the original injury. And that's how it was for me. So I believe that in the 3 weeks leading up to going out to the Great Pyramid, that most of the injury had already been healed, but there was a kind of latency, a kind of hysteresis effect where the spasm was still holding on, you know, and that was what was really causing all the pain. And simply by having low frequency sound, that produced far more oxygen in my blood, as I'm going to explain in a few moments. And that's what released the pain, hypothetically. We're coming on now to the remarkable vagus nerve. This is a great diagram that shows how this longest nerve in the body is connected to almost every part of the body. All the different organs are all interconnected via the vagus nerve. And you see there at the top of the diagram, the auricular branch. It's actually the first branch to come off from the brain, goes to the left ear and to the right ear. And then the next area for it to feed is the pharynx and the larynx. And what this means is, when we talk about this in a few moments, you'll understand a little more, but stimulating the vagus nerve is extremely important for good health. And so we can stimulate it auricular via the ears, but we can also stimulate vocally. So we make sound, even speaking actually is helping to stimulate the vagus nerve. But of course, if we sing or we tone, that is even better in terms of stimulation. Full appreciation of the autonomic vagus nerve requires a distinction between the neurophysiologic aspects of the autonomic system's two main sub-branches, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. These two aspects of the autonomic nervous system can be thought of as a sympathetic accelerator and a parasympathetic brake, providing bidirectional neural communication between our organs and brainstem. Several nerve tracts in the brain can send sympathetic signals to stimulate a faster heartbeat, but only the vagus nerve sends a slowing signal, achieved during exhalation. The heart beats slightly faster as we inhale and slower as we exhale, termed respiratory sinus arrhythmia, which is a measure of vagal tone. The auditory nerve that carries sound signals from the ears to the brain receives close crosstalk from the auricular branch of the vagus nerve. The bidirectional communication between the brain and the gastrointestinal tract, sometimes called the brain-gut axis, is a complex system that includes the vagus nerve. It's becoming increasingly important as a therapeutic target for gastrointestinal and psychiatric disorders, such as inflammatory bowel disease, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder. The gut is an important control center of the immune system, and the vagus nerve has immunomodulatory properties. As a result, the vagus nerve plays important roles in the relationship between the gut, the brain, and inflammation. There is a hardwired connection between the nervous system and the immune system as an anti-inflammatory mechanism. Counter-regulatory mechanisms such as anti-inflammatory cytokines normally limit the acute inflammatory response and prevent the spread of inflammatory mediators into the bloodstream. However, this system can become unbalanced, as we all know, leading to chronic inflammation. But sonic stimulation of the vagus nerve can help restore cytokine balance, leading to a reduction in chronic inflammation. Isn't this wonderful? That simply by stimulating the vagus nerve, anyone who has chronic inflammation can be supported, can be helped.
Would you say that stimulation would be a frequency or music or anything?
No, as you'll find in the chapter that I'll send you, David, the frequencies that have been discovered so far in the medical literature are all very low frequencies. I'm talking very low. I mean, way down even to 5 hertz.
Wow.
And up to kind of 30, 40 hertz, but most of them are in these kind of low frequencies. Hang on, I'm going backwards. I've got the wrong slide here. Okay,
cool.
So before I go on there, just to mention though, that this is really a wonderful thing, and the best possible way to stimulate the vagus nerve through the ears is via the tragus. You know, the tragus is this little flap of tissue that just juts out over the auditory canal, that little flap of tissue, and that we can use to close our ears off if we don't want to hear something. Well, that's the tragus, okay? And that is where the auricular branch of the vagus nerve terminates. And I've seen some people actually with ear piercings through that tragus, and it, you know, oh, when I see it, I don't like the feeling that I get inside me. But anyway, that's, you know, that's their choice, of course. But if we wear headphones, and particularly if we use high quality, high specification headphones that have a very good low frequency response, and then we listen to music, whatever the music is, it doesn't matter, as long as we love the music, then we will get multiple benefits, of course. And one of the ways is via stimulation of the vagus nerve, via the tragus. So a lot more information in my chapter on this subject, but that's the kind of essence of it. Now we're coming on close to the end of the presentation now. I'd like to talk a little bit about oxygen-driven healing by sound. I mentioned there about the pain, spasm, pain cycle. And I mentioned that it's oxygen that actually halts that cycle, okay? Well, where does the oxygen come from? Why was it that within 20 minutes of making sound in the King's Chamber, all of that pain left me? Well, the reason is very simple. And it's because when sound enters into blood, it actually causes pressure in the blood that then causes the hemoglobin molecules that are in the red blood cells to absorb more oxygen than they would without the sound. Now, if you think about your heart for a moment, your heart, obviously, its primary role is, of course, to circulate the blood around the body, right? But it has a secondary role as well. And the secondary role is to produce sound. These are literally low frequency pulses of sound that obviously go right throughout our whole circulatory system. And the purpose of these low frequency sound pulses is to do exactly that I've just described, to cause the hemoglobin molecules to uptake the oxygen that's already dissolved in the blood, okay? So you know what happens if your heart stops? Well, you know that you will black out within seconds, even though, when I tell you that the blood in your brain is engorged with oxygen, all of the blood in your body is engorged with oxygen, dissolved in the blood all of the time. Just through normal respiration, your blood has all of this oxygen in it, but it's not available to the hemoglobin molecules because there's no pressure to cause it to be uptaken. So you need those pressure pulses. And that's why, of course, the heart does a really great job normally if we have a normal, healthy heart. But for people that have underlying health conditions, heart problems, and so on, of course, they're not getting enough oxygen into their body. And when I tell you that oxygen is the key to all healing in the body, you need oxygen in your body to heal, to cause the proteins to repair, and so on. Oxygen is a key ingredient, is the key ingredient. And so when I tell you that by injecting low frequency sound into your body, you will actually have far more availability of oxygen, then I think you understand the importance of this aspect of sound therapy. Now here you see Professor G injecting some whole blood into the Seismoscope instrument in our lab. This was part of a collaboration that we did with Professor G a couple of years ago. And for those of you who don't know, Professor G is actually the father of Saya G, who runs the fabulous greenmedinfo.com website, which is probably the world's largest natural medicine website. It's a really wonderful resource if you don't already know about it. Anyway, the work that we did with Professor G, I'm just going to describe now when we coming to the end of my presentation. And it concerns this. A few years ago, I had this idea to conduct a series of experiments with whole blood in a musical environment to see whether the longevity of red blood cells would be affected by immersion in music. So in collaboration with, as I mentioned, Professor G and Saya G of greenmedinfo.com, we did this wonderful series of experiments in which we played music to a vial of blood. So you take a vial of blood from a volunteer, from a blood bank actually, decant it into two smaller test tubes. One goes into this musical environment at blood temperature. There you see it with a small speaker. And then the other vial goes into a very quiet environment in our lab in a Faraday cage. So it's screened from any electromagnetic radiation, but it's also very, very quiet in there. And then we do a count of blood cells after 20 minutes of immersion in the music. And by the way, 20 minutes was suggested by Professor G. And whether it's a coincidence that it was the same period of time, 20 minutes, by which my back was pain-free, I don't actually know, but probably there is a connection here between the two. Anyway, so then we do a blood count using an automatic cell counter. And what we found with every genre of music that we tried, and we tried lots of different genres, there were always way more blood cells viable in the musical environment than there were in the quiet environment. This was, of course, after a control test before we even began this experiment. So this was an amazing result. And one of the other aspects to this that was kind of counterintuitive was that classical music did not provide the best result. You probably all heard of these, stories about plants wilting under rock music, but when they're subjected to classical music, they seem to love it. Well, it's not been our experience. In fact, the opposite seems to be the case, that and certainly in terms of red blood cells, they respond far, far better to contemporary popular music, let's call it, than classical music. And the reason for this, of course, I think you already know it, because I've been describing about these low frequencies and how it causes the uptake of oxygen from the blood. And this is, of course, true of all popular music. It usually has a pretty dominant bass register, whereas classical music doesn't usually have much bass energy. So this is the reason, and this is why any kind of music that you love that has a good dominant bass frequency, or it doesn't have to be music, it could be drumming, or it could be crystal bowls, or Tibetan bowls, whatever it is that has a good low frequency register will actually help you to gain more oxygen in your body, and therefore generally more repair. And so with that, I'm going to end my presentation. I hope it's joined some dots for you. I hope that you've learned a few things that will help you in your own life and in your own practices. And it's been a great pleasure for me to distill for you today just a few of the biological mechanisms that are contained in this chapter for the new medical textbook. Thank you for your time.
Wow. Oh my God. Excellent. So, whenever I get a strong intuition on this last where you're talking about the red blood cells, that it's the beat, and that it's not just the lows, it's the beat that the heart is actually creating, because the heart is like rock music, right? It's got a beat, right? It's got a beat, and it'll be interesting to check it out, whether it's actually the lows or the beat, or of course both. It probably is both, but I bet the beat is a huge part of it. That pulse that's coming from the heart that's creating.
I think that's a very good point that you've made, David. And actually, I'm planning a further series of experiments. So far, all of these experiments have been in vitro. So we've done no in vivo experiments, but the next series of experiments will not only be in vivo. In other words, we'll have actual volunteers in the lab with us. We will be taking blood from them. You don't need a lot of blood, by the way, for these little instruments to work. Very small volumes of blood can be taken and used for these measuring instruments. A little finger prick basically is all you need. So we'll be actually immersing people in whole body immersion in musical environments, in the Faraday cage, of course. And then we'll be testing them, both before music and after music. And we're not only going to be testing red blood cell counts, we're also going to be testing white blood cell counts, and we're also going to be testing oxygenation blood levels as well, because this is obviously all of the key to why this mechanism works in the first place. It's because more oxygen is made available to the proteins. So if you take a test tube of whole human blood, it will always contain trillions and trillions of probably not trillions, but certainly many millions, let's say, of red blood cells that are viable, that are healthy and viable. There'll also be millions that are already dead. And there'll be other millions that are in a kind of transitory stage that are classed medically as old. And it's these old red blood cells, that the oxygen is actually repairing through the protein repair mechanisms within this very short period of time, only 20 minutes. And it gives you new blood cells for old. It's a bit like the old story of the genie and the lamp.
It's huge. There's so many thoughts. Do you have a few hours here? Just kidding. First of all, the sound tables and sound lounges that we make, because they are so incredible at getting the low frequencies into the body. That seems like really important. But also then the other question is, are the frequencies and the tempo of the rhythm specific to the person and to create more blood cells?
Well, in the studies that I've actually related in my chapter, these studies are all talking about whole body vibration, which is always very, very low frequency. And none of the studies that I've seen so far have had any rhythm to them. They're just simply in low frequency vibrations into supine patients. Basically, that's what they're doing. And in most cases, it actually comes through through the feet, as opposed to through the whole body. And I think that's a big mistake. I would like to do a study where the whole body is receiving these low frequency vibrations. And yes, David, we could do a study where there's rhythm as well as simple, static. In fact, if there was rhythm, I think that the patient would probably prefer that, like waves of energy rather than a static sinusoidal kind of tone. I think a static tone of 40 hertz, for example, would probably drive you nuts, but if it had some rhythm to it, it would be far more acceptable, I'm pretty sure.
Right. Excellent. I've actually been in a hot tub with transducers mounted on the bottom. Oh my God, if you want to get low frequencies in every cell, I mean, just to be totally immersed in water with it, it's intense. It's so strong. You have to be really careful, actually.
Yeah, I think so, actually, because you can have too much oxygen in your body,
right?
And that's not good either. All things in moderation, as my mom and dad used to tell me. All things in moderation, and that's right. It's right for nature, actually.
Right.
You don't want too much of anything.
There's one funny comment. God just really messed up when he came up with pain. It just went a little overboard, I think. I mean, it's just, it's nice to know there's a problem, but pain can just cause more problems, right? It's really funny.
I hear what you're saying, and I kind of agree with you in general. Not that there's much we can do about it, but like I said earlier about the pain that I was experiencing as I went out to Egypt that time in '97, it was absolutely excruciating. And then, of course, to learn once I got there and immerse myself in this low frequency environment, not to mediate the pain. Of course, I had no idea it was going to do that. But the point I'm making is that those low frequencies then showed me that pain can be completely mediated by low frequency sound. Right. However, of course, I didn't understand the mechanism at that time. I now know, or at least hypothetically anyway, that the healing had already taken place. My lower back had been splinted by this spasm for 3 weeks, and I'd been in agony. But think about this, David. The main reason for the pain was not the injury; it was the splint. It was the spasm. And so, that's why I'm really agreeing with what you said there. That why do we have to have so much pain when even more than the original injury?
Right. Well, we've got a belt you can strap on with transducers and frequencies for pain. They're so effective, but I know it could be so much better. It's like I've actually hurt my back last week and used it, and it's completely gone. I actually hit my knee on some cement really badly. And what's really interesting I've learned is when you get vibration on a pain when it first happens, especially if it's a bruise or a burn, then it stops that full response going through the body and can interrupt it and really make it go away like very quickly.
I agree with that as well. Yeah, it's been my experience too. So what a wonderful world that we are heading towards, David.
Yeah. Oh my God. Okay, so from what we talked about in the beginning, with funding, we could open up a facility and put them out to the world for just about everything you said on all the different levels you talked about. Do a little more research, but just actually get centers and start healing people dramatically. Right? That's where I see that we could really help people the most. And then, not even franchise them, but put the information out. Maybe we could franchise, but put it out there for people to actually be able to use this information and get these centers out there so we help people dramatically. With the funding, we wouldn't have to worry about money.
Exactly. Well, I hope you know some very, very wealthy people, David.
Oh yeah, yeah. They're showing up at the door. They don't have to get out of
Wonderful.
bed these days. Yeah.
Wow, good for you. That's great. Good to
Yeah.
know.
Well, this is just incredible. The amount of research and the detail that you've put into this is just excellent, and I see it's moving the field forward more than anybody I've seen in the field, and I just really appreciate the work
Wow.
you've done.
Bless you, David. Thank you so much for saying
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
This has been a presentation of New Earth One Network, your home for New Earth living. Access information, education, and videos on living from the heart in Unity Consciousness. Visit newearth1.com.